we are going to be using the spectrophotometers to measure where each color begins, like a number that goes with those colors. And we're going to see if we can together as a group come up with some ranges. Now, is anyone familiar with the acronym we use for the colors of visible light? Roy G. Biff, right? So we have the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. We are going to check that when you get to your spectrophotometer, they've all been turned on, and these have to warm up for about 30 minutes. There are some that we use. There are some vernier ones, if you're familiar with vernier data collection, some vernier spectrophotometers that I don't think need that warm-up period, but some of the older instruments do. But they're already on, they've been warming up, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we press, it's the ATC button, to make sure that it's in absorbance mode. And once it's there, we want to use the up and down arrows to set our wavelength to 325 nanometers. Now, I noticed when I was setting some of these spectrophotometers up, some of them don't look quite the same like the one I was using when I was going through and making sure this worked. So if you can't get the wavelength down to 325, we just want it down to the lowest where it won't go any lower. So what's its lowest threshold. And then we want to set our blank. We won't have anything in the sample compartment, but we should be able to just press 0 absorbance, and that'll run through whatever cycle it does. And it just says, okay, this is all of the light is going through, none of the light is getting absorbed, this is full on whatever it does. And that way it's teaching the instrument, what it's reading. Then what we want to do is next to each spectrophotometer with your group, we want to cut a really thin strip of like white cardstock. I set some note cards and some scissors there. So we just want a nice thin strip that we can set down into the sample compartment. And the idea is that the light that's flashing through, or that's passing through, that we want to be able to see that light eventually. Right now, when it's set at the very low wavelength, we probably won't be able to see that because that's a little below where our eyes can start to detect it. But eventually we'll see like a little tiny little speck of light, and then that light, as we increase the wavelength, that light will begin to change colors. And so what we want to do is we want to leave the sample compartment open. Once everyone is there and everyone has zeroed their instrument, we're going to go ahead and shut the room lights off because it's going to be a little easier to see that. And we want to begin with our lowest wavelength and slowly increase until we see our first color. And that's then where we'll get our paper. Now, I did already list some colors there, our Roy G. Biv colors, but we want to go with the first color that you observe, and we want to know what is the first wavelength where you see that color. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody's going to see that at the same wavelength, right? Some of the instruments might be different, we might be perceiving them differently, but we want to record that very first wavelength and then keep increasing until we start to see a change. So then we want to get the last wavelength where we're seeing that first color, and then the first wavelength where we see that next color. Does that kind of make sense? And then we're just going to keep going through. If you don't see a color, you don't have to put the data there. You might not see all of those colors that are listed on that table, and that's okay. You don't have to have all of those rows filled out. Maybe green will never show up in that spectrophotometer. I don't know. Maybe it's broken or something. I don't know. So only write down the data that you're actually observing. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. So again, we have 6 of the spectrophotometers set out. So we'll go ahead and just kind of disperse to those. We'll zero it down. And once everyone has it zeroed, we'll give about 3 or 4 minutes here to do that. We'll shut out the room light.